Hi, and welcome to the latest in our Sustainable Futures career conversations. Here today with the CEO of Neighbourly, Steve Butterworth. Steve, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, it's Steve Butterworth, Chief Executive of Neighbourly. We're a corporate giving platform, helps connect big businesses with local good causes.
Fantastic. And we'll talk a lot more about Neighbourly and how Neighbourly and Hays are working together later on. But I want to start by talking about your career, and it's a sort of little bit of an atypical one in the context of the sustainability space, in that you haven't really got that background. Talk to me about your sort of early ambitions and career, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, so I guess to summarise the career, it's been in running investor-backed software companies. I did a degree in geography which had a sustainability course in it, but this was early 90s, so sustainability as a topic of conversation was embryonic at best. I did come from quite a community-minded family, so my mother was a Citizens Advice Bureau advisor for 25 years, my dad's been a prolific fundraiser for charity, albeit I didn't necessarily think of it. I guess it was sort of innate with a family environment, but I joined a tech startup in the late 90s before they were called startups. Yep. And that had nothing to do with sustainability at all. It was a legal technology company. It was a brilliant experience working with those guys. We were very much focused on the UK market at the time, and we were presented with the opportunity to potentially buy that business. So I went through a very traditional management buyout. My business partner and I and a couple of other guys bought that business. That was in mid-2000s, and the growth story for that company was to take it international. So we were very much single product, single vertical market, and single jurisdiction. And so we successfully completed the MBO, and my business partner stayed in the UK. He ran the mothership, and I moved over to the US.
Okay.
And so then set up offices in Chicago, Toronto, Sydney, and then I ran those offices for a period of about 5 or 6 years. Obviously, winding the clock back to the mid-2000s, we moved out there. We did the 2006 MBO, 2007 moved to the States, 2008 global economic financial meltdown, as we'll remember. And so that obviously presented some real challenges for me, going through what was now a very different dynamic in the boardroom, because we had private equity investors sat on the board. It was still had a wonderful culture as a business, but invariably when you're growing, there is an evolution of that. But ultimately, it all came good, and we exited in what was a secondary buyout, actually, to another private equity house, and that was wonderful from the point of view of the fact it had been our senior management team that we brought through the business. It was almost like sort of the 101 of succession planning. And so those guys took it on. And of course, the great thing about a secondary buyout is that you're the ghost of Christmas past. And so we had been in the States for 5 years. Both our kids had been born stateside. And so we decided at that point, it was firstly time for me to move on from that business. I'd been there 13 years. So I think it was kind of 3 chapters within that. But ultimately, it was a great result. We moved back to the UK and settled just outside of Bristol. And I guess that was sort of the first time that I paused to think about what next, because it would have been very easy to repeat what I'd done. But one of the things that I'd really started to gain an appreciation of was this challenge that when you've got third-party investors in your business, they're very much fixed on the numbers, and understandably so. Yes. You then start thinking, well, is this a kind of profit at all cost environment that I'm really comfortable with? And so over a period of about 3 or 4 years, I was doing various sort of consulting roles and NED roles and advisory roles, and it was really interesting to sort of get a bit of a flavour for businesses of all sizes that I was supporting, mostly private equity backed. And in 2015, I came across the concept of a B corporation, and I'd never heard of a B corporation at the time. And it was in 2015 that the first cohort of UK businesses certified as B Corp. It's obviously a US concept. And for the avoidance of doubt, B stands for benefit, and it's very much about businesses that are focused on the triple bottom line. So it's people, planet, and profit. But it was also that idea of being able to take into account the interests of all stakeholders rather than it just being about the shareholders. And I was really inspired by the idea of getting involved in a business that could be high growth, high value, but with a purpose. And arguably, it's still quite new. There's only 2,000 businesses in the UK that are certified B Corps. Very proud to say that Neighbourly is one of the founding B Corps from 2015. And I got brought into the business by the investors in the early part of 2018. And we can sort of go into a bit of that story in a moment. But certainly in terms of my journey into a more purpose-led business, I think it was off the back of having run investor-backed software companies and thinking maybe there's a slightly different dynamic here, which is better for me, and I think also better for everyone who's involved in that journey.
Yes, fascinating. And I think it's probably a good chance to look at Neighbourly and sort of its origins and then where it is at the moment. It's been an interesting journey as it sort of becomes a more established practice to bring social value as part of that ESG and corporate social responsibility piece. Neighbourly has sort of grown with that, it appears to me. Is that how you see it as well?
I mean, as they say, timing is everything. I mean, the business was originally set up in 2013, so it'd been around for a few years. It definitely sort of went through that sort of classic sort of startup iteration, trying to work out what its value prop really was, what was going to resonate with the target market, who was the target market. But if you look back over, I'd say probably more like the last sort of 5 or 6 years, you've just used a few phrases, Paul, around like ESG, CSR, sustainability. Certainly the rise of the corporate ESG agenda, and I'm very deliberately using that, an acronym, has put these conversations squarely into the boardroom. And so you've got a very different level of stakeholder getting engaged here. And by that, I'm talking about the C-suite. And so where perhaps historically CSR might have been regarded as a bit of a tick box exercise, I think what we've now found that ESG has sort of put a more measurement, if you like, layer over the top of that. So it's all about wanting to be more responsible, but how do you quantify that? How do you qualify that? And actually, how important is it to that business? And certainly, I think we've seen the evolution of businesses that are wanting to be more responsible. But of course, the question is how? And there are many, many, many areas within sustainability that we'll get onto to talk about in regard to that. But from Neighbourly's perspective, you had a lot of businesses that wanted to support the community part, and that pillar for quite a lot of organizations was important. But if you're trying to have a positive impact at a local level, but then do that at scale, that's full of friction, can be quite difficult. And I guess Neighbourly was set up as this corporate giving platform to say, well, if you've got volunteering time, financial support, or product surplus like food to be able to give away, but you want to give it to local organizations and do that at scale, Neighbourly was set up to remove the friction in that process.
No, indeed. And as you say, it's sort of ridden that tide of the ESG agenda becoming not just about climate change, but incorporating the social part and social value into that. How do you define sort of ESG and where Neighbourly fits into that?
I think we have probably led with the S in ESG. Albeit it's worth remembering that the S is still incredibly broad. So within the S part, it's very much that community engagement piece, that community investment element, very much closely followed by then the E part. So a lot of our programs, so let's look at, say, volunteering, you might find skills-based volunteering programs that are about employability and social mobility, going in and helping. When you think about what Hays does as a recruiter, going in and helping in areas where there is a need for interview skills training, and maybe even going into schools and working through what mentoring programs could look like. There's that sort of skills-based element to it, and that's become, I think, sort of part and parcel of how organizations have wanted to embrace it. But then you have the more sort of practical type of volunteering. But how do you find those causes that are going to be meaningful to not just going to align with the purpose and the values of the business, but actually going to resonate with the employees? And I think that's been a really important part of our journey, is how do you get the employee engagement part in as well as the community investment part and join the dots?
And I've seen that from the sort of Hays perspective of helping for tomorrow, and Neighbourly is supporting that. I did my Neighbourly Day last month, which was fantastic, really good opportunity to get out and do something different for the community. And I'm keen to just sort of explore how that relationship with Hays came about and where you see that fitting, what sort of value you're bringing to what we're doing from your perspective.
So I'm gonna, honestly, put you on a bit of a pedestal, because I'd say Hays was very brave. We engaged with Karen, who came to us and said, look, we've got a directive from the board to explore different ways of how we as an organisation can bring all of our staff together. Traditionally there's been an annual conference. We've all experienced what's been going on and witnessed the impact of the cost of living crisis, very much sort of hot on the heels of COVID. And I think the Hays board recognised that in terms of what was appropriate when it came to bringing the staff together, it's one thing celebrating business success, but actually is there a way of making it inclusive, B, and by that not just the sales team necessarily, but everyone and anyone in the organisation, and also nationwide. And so the brief, if you like, to Neighbourly from the team was to how can we help you be able to activate that social purpose at a local level, but then do it at scale. And I mean, it has been a wonderfully collaborative effort between the Hays team, huge amount of internal communication, galvanizing people into action, and then the Neighbourly team behind the scenes helping to source organizations, events, orchestrate the whole thing. And then I think coming back to the ESG piece, and this is the G part, is how do you then capture the impact on that? And that is obviously the measurement piece as well. So then being able to sort of feed back to the business, say that this is what you guys have done. And I think back to your first program, which was last summer. So nearly 2,000 employees went out and volunteered in a 2-week period, which is a phenomenal peak of activity. And at the end of it, there was a brilliant film that was shown to the whole organisation, and your CEO Simon obviously sort of celebrating what had been achieved, but telling the very human story behind these programs. So it's one thing quantifying it, measuring it, putting numbers behind it, but actually it's the human element that is a really important reminder to why we're doing it.
And that fact that it's an opportunity for colleagues to get together and work collaboratively outside of the working environment. I think that's something that's easily overlooked in these things, is there is a significant value in that. And we're not the only organisation you work with. Are there any other examples of things that you've done that you think that was just a really good, practical demonstration of what the organisation, what your Neighbourly organisation is all about?
Yeah, so I mean, to your point, we're completely sector agnostic. So I say Hays being a recruiter, we do a lot of work within financial services sector. So insurers like Gallagher, like RSA, also working with people like TSB, NatWest. Then we've done a lot within FMCG, people like Danone, Heineken, Coca-Cola, and then we do a lot of in the retail space as well. So Lidl, Aldi, Sainsbury's, M&S, organisations like that. And if I look at the Neighbourly platform again, think about it in being a one-stop shop for your corporate giving when it comes to those three resources: time, money, and product. I'm really proud of the big food surplus redistribution programs that happen. So 365 days a year, you've got over 5,000 locations connected with a local good cause and a backup cause if they can't collect, collecting that surplus food and keeping it hyper-local. So you think about the environmental piece here, this is about not putting more food miles on the product, it's about keeping it into those communities, but it's also looking after those communities that are where the customers for those organisations are based. There's a brilliant quote from Paul Pullman, used to be CEO at Unilever, and he said, businesses can't survive in societies that fail.
Yes.
And so there is, and I don't see any problem with this, but there is a kind of a selfish motivator, if you like, around why these programs are really important. Because if you can build out happy, healthy, resilient communities, that's good for business. And I look at all of these programs, but especially those super transactional daily programs around redistributing food to those that need it most. So it's actually really about supporting everyone within the community who is struggling and is challenged. And I think those programs are incredibly impactful. But then I think what you've also found when you look at the community grant program, so doing a brilliant program with New Look at the moment, where you've got over 400 locations, you've got store staff nominating causes that mean something to them in the area where their customers and their employees live, getting customers then donating at the point of sale, and then being able to then put that money straight back into the community. So there's a wonderful circularity around that. So I mean, I could go on. Those sorts of programs, I'd say, are often not known. It's the local play, and I think we've found that charities exist on a continuum. You've got the super big guys who do phenomenal work globally, nationwide, but often actually the causes that are most trusted in our communities are those grassroots causes, but it's hard to find them. It's
Yes.
hard to support them easily, especially for bigger organisations. And I think what we tried to do is just sort of balance the scales a little bit and make that possible.
And where next for Neighbourly? What's the sort of next?
Yeah, I mean, it's an exciting opportunity. The local story is a global conversation, and so when we've looked at, and I guess I sort of don my CEO hat, think of the strategy from here. We've been very, very focused on becoming a market leader within our home market, but we work with international companies, global brands, and there's a constant dialogue with them around, well, where else can you help us? And so whether it's in mainland Europe, whether it's over into North America, obviously I've spent time in the States and been on that journey. We're going through, as you would expect, the usual kind of sort of strategic planning as to where is the market opportunity, what are the barriers to entry, what is the competitive landscape, but also there's then the kind of the funding piece and thinking around part of my job, which I wouldn't necessarily have anticipated when I first joined the tech startup in the late 90s, is getting into that fundraising mold. And now that whole process of going out, finding organizations that A, have got the money, B, have also, they're aligned with your values as well. So your opportunity gets narrower and narrower and narrower. But we've been super lucky in the organizations that have supported us. And for us, the next stage is you can't go international easily without having the resources behind you. And so as a sustainable, growing business, I think the next step change for us would be to raise money to take us international.
Sounds really exciting. Let's bring you back to skills and sort of career and developing a career and lessons that you've learned during that process. So the fresh geography graduate didn't see himself, I suspect, as the CEO of a Neighbourly business. How's that evolution of your career taken shape? Well, how much of it is directed and how much of it has been happenstance and
I think I would be the first to say that, I mean, there is an impulsive part to me that has definitely helped in terms of some of the decision making, because I probably haven't necessarily always overthought what I was doing, and there is that sort of fine line between bravery and stupidity. I think if I'd gone into the MBO, for instance, and known what I was taking on, I probably wouldn't have done it. I mean, with the power of hindsight, I'm glad I did. But I feel like I've always, and I guess this is the way that I was raised, I was always encouraged to take chances and don't worry if it goes wrong. I think for someone who didn't like technology, I didn't like computers and I guess gaming wasn't anywhere near the sort of size thing it is today when I was growing up. But I definitely was I was more outdoors. I was less interested in sort of being stuck behind a computer. What I found in the tech sector was the pace of change was so unbelievably exciting.
Right.
And I think what it opened up this world of opportunity for me that said none of this is going to stand still. And I love that. And so I certainly embrace the excitement that come with being in a world where a lot of the time you're not making stuff up, but you're certainly making some big decisions with very few data points to be able to support what that decision might be. And I think that piece has really sort of been in the background for me all along, has been don't be afraid to make a decision, but it's that kind of almost go fast and break things and don't be afraid to fail, but learn from that and make a better decision next time.
So on that balance between skills being trained and being learned on the job,
yeah,
you would fall more into the learn as you've gone along rather than the formal training.
Yeah, I haven't done an MBA. I certainly look back on my MBO and go, it was almost like an active MBA. I was learning on the job, and there was certainly a lot of skills that I probably would have benefited from if I'd done that gone down that path. I've definitely not. I'm not an accountant. I've done training. I'm a very commercial-led individual, so I'm probably less operator, more frontline. I've been fortunate enough to be supported by some phenomenal colleagues and teams behind me throughout my career. But I'd say, I've learned a lot. I've not been afraid to pivot, and I've always wanted to just be a sponge to new knowledge and new experience.
I think that's something that comes up in most of the conversations I have, is that sponge element, that willingness to be curious, willingness to think about, okay, what does that mean? Where does that fit into the wider scheme of things? And then follow a little bit of passion to say, okay, I quite fancy doing that. Let's give it a try. And that sounds like it's been a sort of a familiar story for you as well.
Yeah. So 2 words you use there, I think. Passion and curiosity have been key components from my perspective. I definitely, I graduated. A lot of my friends came into the city, and they went into very sort of traditional, let's call it milk ground type jobs. I always knew that wasn't for me, and I kind of rebelled against that. And actually, so my first job was in shop fitting. Yeah, I don't declare that very often.
No, there we go.
But it was more because I just needed a job, and
yes.
it was a paycheck, it was some experience, and I kind of went from there. It was brilliant.
Yeah,
I learned a lot. But I certainly sort of found myself not wanting to go down a sort of traditional path of being in those big businesses. So I've definitely sort of enjoyed. I've probably got a natural cut-off in terms of size of organisation at probably between 100 and 200 people, because it starts for me to become less personal at that point. But I've certainly sort of learned along the way of just rolling my sleeves up, and there are no airs and graces in Neighbourly. I think it's fair to say everyone gets stuck in, and it's a bit of a musketeer mentality.
Yes. I'm interested just to explore that B Corp experience that you've had a little bit more in terms of how that's added to Neighbourly's purpose and how you find working within those constraints that could be seen as constraints.
Yes, I think you'd find that organisations that have gone through the B impact assessment, which is what you do to then become certified as a B Corp, is and can be very challenging, and it does give you reason to pause for thought when you're making some decisions. When there might be and I was actually chatting to someone only last night, and he was saying part of the challenge of their organisation, which is they're an FMCG organisation, they were trying to get samples out to a new market, and he said we had to stop thinking about flying stuff out, but actually put it on a boat. So then we were delaying product launches to get stuff there, and that's a big decision to make. But I think what we found, certainly in terms of being a B Corp, is it's in the absolute DNA of the organisation, and we use it as a retention tool. Yep. We use it as a recruitment tool. Yep. We use it as a marketing tool. I think we found that given where the space we sit in, where you're able to work with the third sector, there is a sort of a degree of sort of eyebrow raising. Well, should you be a profitable business doing that? And you go, well, our corporate partners want a commercially minded organisation to work with you, and B Corp bridges the gap for us, doing it in a more purposeful way. So I'd say that B Corp piece is not an easy one, and it doesn't mean that everyone has to be a B Corp by any means. And I think that's really important when you think about this 5.5 million businesses in the UK, only 2,000 are B Corps, but there are guiding lights that can help you become more responsible, which obviously feeds into the whole sort of being more sustainable generally. Yes. Is a career path now, I think, which is opening up all sorts of opportunities.
Let's think about that career path. And we're sort of coming towards the end of the conversation, and I'm interested in the words of wisdom, the tips, the things that you wish you'd known that you would pass on. Is there anything there that obviously we've talked about a few things, but anything that you'd sort of pick out and say, that's really been crucial if you want to develop that successful career? What are the nuggets that you'd pass on?
I'd probably start by saying sustainability as a career path is still relatively new. And kind of like it was for me going into tech in the late 90s, it was almost working itself out. And I think sustainability is an incredibly exciting space to go into right now. And there is a wealth of opportunities. So whether you're more environmentally focused or maybe more socially minded, then there are multiple different avenues to explore. So I guess my first advice would be to keep that open mind to what the art of the possible could be. There is a degree of being able to write your own script right now. I think when you look at businesses, by 2025, 60% of the workforce are going to be Gen Zs and millennials. They are the more sustainably minded employees within organizations today. That means in literally 18 months' time, we're going to be in a world where businesses are being expected to be more responsible. So if you want to be in a career that has got an unbelievable trajectory upwards, then now's the right time to be getting involved, because it is only going to become bigger, it's only going to become more competitive and be well paid. And I think that for me is super exciting.
Yes, fantastic. What a good opportunity to say thank you very much. That's really useful, really inspiring, I think, and certainly I found it very useful. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Thank you.